invitation. It's an honor for me to be here. And as you know, this conference is set in the against the backdrop of the G20 meetings. So I thought it would be interesting to probably devote a few comments about what are the kind of things that we are discussing, what are the concerns that we have, and some of the main issues that are providing the backdrop against which individual macro policies are developed in each of the countries. So we hope, and we certainly are having a slightly different conversation this year in the G20 than we had last year. So let me tell you which were some of the main concerns that were part of the discussion that we had last year, how we have addressed it there, and what are the things that we want to do now. Probably, as you know, the most important feature of the 2019 fiscal year was what has been called synchronized deceleration. For the IMF has mentioned that for the set of countries that represent 90% of total global GDP, enter in a process of deceleration with respect to 2080. Moreover, according to the analysis of the same institution, the main reason why the economy was in a synchronized deceleration were mostly trade tensions, and particularly the U.S. and China trade tensions. So it was not necessarily a good year in terms of an environment for investment. On top of the U.S.-China tensions, there was, of course, the Brexit, and there was no clarity for many months until really recently if the United Kingdom was indeed gonna step out of the Euro Union, and under which condition there were problems in the Middle East, and this has recently composed by the coronavirus epidemic. But one thing that one needs to try to understand, to distill, is what is the channel through which trade tensions operate to reduce economic growth. And we have reached an agreement that uncertainty is the main channel through which trade tensions affect economic growth. And as one analyst put it, trade tensions put the economy in an impasse. Suppose that trade tensions could be resolved in one way or the other. You could have a more open economy, or you could have a closer economy. If you have a more open economy, those firms that are going to export start investing. If you have a closer economy, those firms that invest to produce locally are gonna invest. But when you don't know which of these two situations you are going to end up, what happens is that firms decide to postpone investment until the landscape is clear, and that's what we have during 2019. So what most countries were doing last year to face these issues? The first one, we saw a very I would say almost correlated reduction in interest rates, an ease of monetary policy across the world. There are a series of countries for which, for all practical purposes, the sovereign interest rates are below zero. The real interest rates are negative. But although it has been very plausible that there was a very fast response on the monetary side to this, the fact was that interest rates were already relatively low, globally speaking. So the space for that monetary policy has to operate is relatively narrow. So we are seeing already what many people call ultra-low interest rates. So there's very little that interest rates could do now. Now, if there's little space for monetary policy, it is now the time for fiscal policy. Although the ability for fiscal policy to act when there is a downturn is well known and go back to the Terry's and Keynes proposals, it really pick up again as a policy recipe after the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. There was a major breakthrough, I would say, in what was a policy paper released in December 2008 by the then chief economist at the IMF, Olivier Blanchard, when he pushed for a very, very specific counter-cyclical fiscal policy of around 2% of GDP in countries that could afford that. But there were some lessons that we have to take very seriously from them. And some of them are very interesting. Probably the most important was that it is not sufficient to design the right kind of policy. It's not sufficient to be ready to implement it. One of the main lessons from the 2008 and 2009 crisis that even countries that wanted to spend more and that have the ability to spend more couldn't spend more because the projects were not ready. So spending in infrastructure, which is a major issue, and it's going to be a main part of the conversation of the G20 this year, is becoming very critical, not only because in general it's very important to step it up, but also because it seems that in particularly in downturns is critical to have the ability to implement public investment projects. The second important feature that we have been discussing is that on the one hand, we have an economy that is slowing down, and on the other hand, we have seen many episodes of social unrest because people are uncomfortable either with the prospects of social mobility or inequality. And that's extremely clear in the case of Mexico and Latin America. Latin America is the most unequal of all regions in the world. It's more unequal than Europe, a much more advanced region than Latin America, but it's also more unequal than Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the poorest area in the world. In fact, the most equal country in Latin America, which is Uruguay, is more unequal than the most unequal country in the Eurozone. And therefore, one of the main concerns that we have in the region, and Mexico is not the exception, is not only about how to grow, but how to grow in a much more inclusive way. And let me give you a couple of examples. The most advanced, because this problem is not only true when you look through a society, but also when you look through the regions within a country. The most advanced economy within Mexico is Mexico City, and the local government with the lowest GDP per capita is Chiapas in the southern part of Mexico. The GDP per capita of Mexico City is almost 7 times the GDP per capita of Chiapas. And when you estimate the Human Development Index of some of the cities in Mexico, of the boroughs in Mexico City, they are pretty close to the Human Development Index in Switzerland. But when you estimate the Human Development Index in some municipalities in Oaxaca, they are to the level of some countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So that means that within the country in Mexico, you basically have not the tale of 2 countries, but of 2 continents. And that's a kind of inequality that is becoming very, very difficult for people to fathom. So what is, against this backdrop, what are we gonna be doing? First of all, and this is extremely important in Mexico, but also in Latin America in general, we have to be extremely careful and being very prudent in the way in which we run fiscal policy and macro and the macro framework. And that includes several things. One is to be able to really keep on track with our fiscal targets. For 2019, we have a primary surplus of 1%. This was very important because our debt was increasing for almost, as a percentage of GDP, for almost 10 years, and we are very committed to stabilize that and to start reducing. The second one is we keep emphasizing, and we will keep emphasizing, that we have an absolutely respect and support for the central bank independence, the ability to have an independent central bank. It has translated in a much more inflation rate than we have, let's say, 20 years ago. And we have a couple and we are now on a path, a very committed path to increase first to tax administration measures and an increase in taxation. Which leads me to one topic which I guess is very important for Mexico, but also people in the Middle East could relate relatively easy. One of the reasons why we collect little taxes in Mexico, only 13% of GDP, is because for many, many years we enjoy the windfall of having revenues from the oil sector. Now, but the context of that has been changing over the last few decades. We almost produce only half of what we were producing in 2003 and 2004. And we also have learned that oils could be really, really generous, but also could be very, very volatile. Just to give you an example, over the last year and a half, the price of the Mexican oil has been everywhere between $77 per barrel and $44 per barrel. So it's very difficult for a country to rely solely in a variable that is so volatile. But nevertheless, it's still very important. 4% the equivalent of 4% of GDP is the total resources that we receive in the public treasury coming from oil. So what we want to do, and what we have been doing with our oil company, with Pemex? We developed a 3-stage strategy to try to support Pemex. The first one was to stabilize production and start to increase it. The production in Pemex reached a floor of around 1.6 million barrels per day about a year ago. We were able to stabilize it, and it's starting to pick it up. The second challenge that we faced with Pemex was related to their liabilities. In 2012, Pemex had a debt of around $50 billion US dollars. By 2018, the debt was more than double, of around $107 billion dollars. And a very particular aspects of concern related to the debt was that a big chunk of the debt was maturing between 2020 and 2024. So we engaged in a major liability management that we concluded last September of around $20 billion that push and improves the debt profile very importantly. We have now still a very, very important challenge with respect to Pemex, which is how to buff up the reserves. So we have been able to increase production, but we still have major issues related to production. I would like to devote just 1 more minute to conclude to what is one of our main challenges for this year. And as we are still dealing with both the synchronized global deceleration and with a cyclical deceleration, it's extremely important for us to design a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, which is something that Mexico has lacked. For many years, most Latin American countries used to have pro-cyclical expenditures. That means that we were spending when we less needed, and we reduce expenses when we were in a downturn. We need to do that and build it according with 3 premises. The first one, a countercyclical fiscal policy, has to be credible, and it has to be technically defined. That means that not only it needs to be designed properly, but it has to be shared with the markets, with international financial institutions, and it has to be discussed with the credit rating agencies, as well as other market participants, as opposed to what happened in the US and in Europe, where you could run a countercyclical fiscal policy without having a proper fund because you have the luxury of automatic stabilizers. We have to pre-fund that in Mexico. So that means that we have to transform what is now a yearly balance fund into a countercyclical fund. And last but not least, an assumption of countercyclical fiscal policies is that resources are going to be going, if needed, to relevant public projects. And we need to build that pipeline of public policy. So it's easier said than done, and this is what we want to be working on this year, and this is actually probably our most ambitious project for this year. Thank you.